A British family's holiday on a remote Swedish island takes an unexpected and terrifying turn when they learn that the serial killer is on the loose. In 1824, on the Swedish island of Svalta, a scared woman cradles a baby in her arms while a group of men and British colonizers laugh and approach her menacingly. 200 years from then, Susan is excitedly narrating this dark history to her husband, Richard, and children, Sam and Jesse. They were just going on vacation for a few days in this island known as Svalta. According to the woman, the island dwellers sealed themselves in isolation for 2 years as they dreaded an epidemic of killer flu. However, many years after the landmass lifted the quarantine, it continued on Svalta until there were not enough people alive to do anything else but eat human flesh to stay alive. Susan continues that every 10 years, the residents of the island stage a bloody 8-hour play for the festival of Karantan. Sam says upon hearing this he will loathe theater and has known that he would for a long time. Then the son declares that he would never eat another human, but his father retorts that if he is hungry and desperate enough, he will not be able to resist the urge. Eventually, they park outside a harbor cafe where Susan orders burgers and beer from the surly cook behind the counter. Just moments later, Richard walks into the store and his wife asks him to go check on their children in case they have wandered out. Meanwhile, the siblings come across a seagull corpse in a back room and Jesse, seemingly callous, photographs the gruesome sight. On receiving the information from the cook that the family was going to Svalta, he dropped all the plates that he was carrying and told them that they shouldn't go on the island at Karantan. The couple continued that they already booked the BB owned by a local guy named Mats and they'd be staying at the remote village for the coming days. However, the cook assures the family will not feel welcome in Svalta, particularly during Karantan, because of the tragic incident with foreigners 200 years ago. Later, when Richard tries to pay for the meal, the intimidating cook grabs his arm and says that if he knows what is good for his family, he should take them back to the city where it is safe. Confused and petrified, Richard stepped away from the counter and lost sight of his wallet. Now as they stood by the entrance, ready to get on the ferry, it dawns upon his father that he had forgotten it in the harbor cafe. Therefore, he makes his way to retrieve it. The woman selling the tickets asks for the names of the family members, and the suspicious Susan wonders why. So the former explains they'll need their names for the manifest in case the vessel sinks. Moments later, Richard rejoins the group and pays for their tickets, and his wife points out that he has some ketchup on his jacket. On the ferry, the islanders look scornfully at the tourists, making the cook's warning come true about the natives' hostility. Suddenly, the known troublemaker and drunkard Johan intimidates the family and they go outside to defuse the tense and awkward situation. Then, the ferry arrives in Svalta and to the surprise of the group, they see many of the locals standing by the dock looking at them. Then, community leader Clara comes to the family and asks them what they're doing on the island. So, Richard and Susan explain that they're on vacation and they'd like to watch the play. Offended, the older woman says that the special performance commemorating Karantan isn't just a play but is an integral part of their lives. Ingimar then says he consulted with the others and they've all decided that the family should get back on the ferry and return to the mainland, but Richard clarifies that Svalta isn't a private island, which means the locals can't legally force them to leave. Then Susan adds that one of the reasons why they made the trip was to pay respects to the dead. Clara doesn't know what she's saying, and so the woman continues to say that her great-great-great-grandfather died on the island. The community leader asks who Susan's ancestor was and then Susan replies that he was one of the courageous officers that the islanders killed 200 years ago. Suddenly, Clara frowns and ominously declares that the foreigners will be leaving Svalta one way or another. She then licks the side of the woman's face. Mats fortunately appears at the door of the cottage to greet the visitors and assures them that most of the inhabitants are harmless. Clara and her sons Van reprimand the man for not getting a consensus from the commune before he brings in some unknown strangers into the island, but he brazenly retorts that their outdated laws do not have any control over 2024. While his wife walked to the dock to compose herself, Richard mentioned that if she wanted to back out all she had to say was the word. So, Susan convinces her husband that she's fine and that she will still pursue their planned vacation because she needs it really badly. At home, Mats requests all the guests to remove their shoes and use the slippers provided. Then Susan asks if the man's mother still lives in the house, but he says she was murdered and beheaded 10 years ago in the very chair Richard is sitting on. Later, Matt sneaks up behind the unsuspecting Jesse and creepily says that it's almost impossible to hear him walk around the house when he's wearing slippers. Since he heard the weird conversation, Sam jokes to his sister, and she decks him on the groin. That afternoon, the host tells the mother that her groceries are in the pantry. He then leaves the house to give the family some privacy. The parents begin preparing dinner, and the daughter goes upstairs to soak in the tub. She hears a shuffling noise outside from behind the mirror and wonders what it could be. That night, Richard and Susan are woken from sleep by masked, robed, torch-bearing islanders gathering outside the house. The frightened woman tearfully demands the trespassers to leave, so one member drops an animal carcass on the porch steps before they all turn around and walk away. As the angry Susan turns to her husband and orders him to get rid of the carcass himself since he just watched as she faced the mob, Clara silently smiles and continues to observe from behind the trees. The following day, Jessie informs her father that she thinks they're being watched. When the man wonders why she'd have this thought, the daughter recounts how she heard a shuffling noise behind the large mirror in the bathroom yesterday. At first, Richard reasons that it may just be the sounds of the house settling, but upon seeing how upset his daughter is, he hugs her and says that she should immediately inform him the next time she feels scared. Meanwhile, Mats observes the lovely interaction on a monitor, revealing that Jessie's suspicions of hidden cameras in the house are valid. Later, the father speaks to the host outside the other cabin on the property and recounts the unsettling events last night. Then, Richard threatens to leave a bad review on the rental app if it isn't sorted out, so the host promises to speak to the commune about the incident. While the family takes a walk and enjoys the lovely scenery around Svolta, Detective Forsberg investigates the gruesome murders of the cook and his wife at the Harbor Cafe. At the same time, the couple notices people offloading 4 coffins from a small boat onto the dock, and they are both wondering who could have died. Later that day, the detective arrives at the dock and informs a local woman that he is there to interview Johan in connection with the murder, and she shares that the man was just released from jail. Susan and Richard are having an intimate time at the house, but unknowing to them, Mats is watching in the surveillance room and pleasuring himself. At the same time, that Forsberg stops the festival rehearsal, which does not please Clara. The cop asks Sven where Johan is, and the man replied that he probably took a boat back to the mainland to buy more liquor. Before the detective turns to leave, Clara commands him to leave Svolta because he has no jurisdiction on the island because the islanders have their law. However, as the cop's boat moves away from the dock, Johan sits at the table watching him, indicating that he never left. Meanwhile, the siblings go into the local restaurant in an attempt to get some waffles from Mingamer. To their surprise, the man refuses to serve them, and when 3 intimidating patrons approach Sam and Jessie, they quickly leave the establishment. Outside, the pair run into masked men carrying the caskets, and the daughter spots the label English Liar on one of them. Just as the siblings enter the house, Mats hears them from upstairs, so he immediately leaves Jessie's room so she does not see him wearing her undergarments and lying on her bed. Seconds later, she enters the room and notices her missing garments and the disheveled sheets. She wonders if her brother took them, but he assures her that he is not interested as he is attracted to men. Then, the inquisitive Jessie fogs up the mirror with her breath and draws a heart, and on the other side of the one-way mirror, the deranged host licks the surface. At an assembly, Clara congratulates the townspeople on all their hard work preparing for tomorrow's celebrations. Since the islanders respect the dead by killing 4 tributes every quarantine, the old lady thinks that with the arrival of the English family, this sign is telling them that they are the ones that should be offered to the gods. However, Ingemar stands up and says that they were only told to scare the tourists away. Sven adds that the last time they honored the quarantine by sacrificing tributes, they were all much younger and more capable of completing the arduous task. Due to the opposing views of other locals against her scheme and not knowing whom to trust, Clara speaks to Mats and reveals that she knows all about his perverse tendencies and substance abuse. The woman promises to keep his secret safe and to make him feel more welcome in the community if he agrees to help her murder the family. Clara explains that since tomorrow is the 200th anniversary of the first quarantine, it only seems right to celebrate the event the traditional way. Before she departs, the woman throws a box of cookie mix at Mats and menaces him to bake a special batch for the tourists. The following day, islanders open their quarantine performance with people dressed as British colonizers, while large geese ride sailboats to shore. Meanwhile, the family sits at the table for breakfast. An exasperated Sam reminds his parents that he cannot eat meat since he is a vegetarian, much to the chagrin of Richard. Mats later reports that he had a word with the commune and that they said it was alright if they watched the play. However, the guests declined the invite, saying that although they appreciate the locals' change of heart, they'd rather go for a swim and just catch the climax of the show later today. As the group makes their way to the harbor, the host says he'll leave the plate of freshly baked cookies in the house for them to enjoy after their swim. Meanwhile, the play onstage unfolds the events of how the British colonizers arrived on the island and bribed the corrupt leader with gold to keep the harbor closed and thus strap the people on Svolta. The family goes back to the house after swimming and finds the cookies Mats had left on the table. They are really glad about this. The corrupt leader, in the stage play, starts feeling penitent for having made the deal with the British when he views the devastation he has caused to the townspeople. Meanwhile, Mats watches from the surveillance room as the guests unwittingly consume the laced baked treats. In the stage play, it is the islanders who capture the colonizers and stand them in line before the caskets. At home, the host finds that all the family members are asleep due to the special cookies, so he once again puts on Jessie's undergarments and creepily lies beside her body, which is totally unconscious. Days back, the daughter decapitated the helpless seagull, and Richard was the one murdering the harbor cafe cook and his wife. He says that it was revealed that they are a family of cold-blooded killers. In the present, the frightened Mats cringe as each crazed family member produces a knife and they take turns stabbing the host until he dies. As the islanders bathe in the fake blood at the end of the show, Richard, Susan, and their 2 children move towards the village armed with an assortment of weapons. Every time the group passes by a local, they take out their blades and dispose of the person with ease and precision. As chaos ensues, Ingmar tells Clara that they should hide or check the harbor for a boat they can take to escape the carnage. However, the woman defiantly exclaims that she won't run away because she wants to cherish what could be her last quarantine. Because of the noise, conflicting accusations are heard ringing in the air, with some claiming that Johan is the killer. In the woods, Richard kills 3 individuals with an axe and a small knife, while his wife kills a man on the ground. That evening, Sam and Jessie go to the harbor office communication center, where they trick the worker by pretending to be the killer's victims begging for help. When the woman is trying to comfort the pair, they end her life with their blades and take a heartless selfie with the lifeless body. Later on, Sven discovers that the communication center has been overrun, and he sends up a flare to let mainland know. Meanwhile, on a neighboring island, a harbor control officer starts getting distress radio calls regarding the havoc at Svolta. Then, the family happens to meet outside a cabin and strategizes on how to liquidate the islanders who are in hiding inside the cabin. Clara tries to run out through the back door and is wounded with a blade pushed through the wooden planks. Sven, in retaliation, thrusts his sword through the wall, impaling the blade in Richard's cheeks, causing him to whimper in agony. The patriarch kicks down the door, and when it swings open, it knocks Clara and Sven into a closet. Now, while the 2 hide, the family bursts into the cabin and attacks the islanders at play dressed animals. At this time, the bumbling Ingmar walks into the building, thinking he is relieved to see a friend, but into the scene steps the sadistic Jessie coming from nowhere, and decapitates him. Before the attack of the family can befall him, one of the fearful islanders ends his life. Moments later, the crazed gang terrorizes a man in a rat costume before taking turns harming him. Meanwhile, that Forsberg answers a frantic phone call from the harbor control officer informing him that Svolta is under siege. She adds that there have been multiple casualties and uncontrollable fires and that people believe Johan was responsible. Simultaneously, Richard and Susan sit by the bonfire, reflecting on their honeymoon in Kaisaruta Island, suggesting that they have traveled around the world terrorizing small communities for years. Moments later, their children arrive, but when Sam makes a sarcastic remark aimed at his father, Richard injures him with a knife, frustrated with his whiny attitude. As Sam takes his final breaths, Richard calls him Ian, revealing that he isn't their son but just an unhinged individual they invited to join their murderous adventures. In the forest, Clara thinks they need to sacrifice the tourists to end the chaos. Then, she asks her son to help her complete the quarantine, so Sven vows to fulfill his mother's wishes. Later, they find the observation room in Mats's cabin, and Clara and armed Sven await them inside the rental home. Susan believes Jesse is prepared to lead her first Trojan horse ploy, in which they get the target to let his guard down by portraying themselves as victims. The cop soon arrives and is shocked by the display on the dock, several heads impaled on stakes. Minutes later, the daughter limps inside and begs Sven for help. However, the startled man shoots Jesse, so she begins making up a story how Mats is responsible for the massacre and how he murdered her father and brother. She adds that Mats is still in the house, so Sven takes the shotgun and checks the bedrooms. After he leaves, Susan barges into the house pretending to be a victim and reunites with her daughter. Meanwhile, Richard sneakily emerges from the secret passageway behind the large mirror. In the bedroom, Sven finds Mats's mangled remains on the bed and wonders what could have happened. Suddenly, he hears Richard's weak whimpers from the other room. Checking to see if the man's okay, he is ambushed by the psychopathic killer who kills Sven. Dying from the attack, the armed man can shoot off the other end and blow off Richard's right hand. The family eventually assembles downstairs and Clara finally understands that, just like the original quarantine 200 years ago, the British brought death and chaos to Svolta. She then grabs a kitchen knife and is ready to strike the group, but that Forsberg saves them by shooting Clara dead, thinking she is the killer. With their secret safe, the family escapes the burning island on the cop's boat. A few minutes later, a few more police officers arrive on the scene, and they shoot Johan, who is running away. But they assume that he had also made the massacre on Svolta Island. In the boat, Jesse announces that this has been the wonderful holiday visit ever, and the psychopathic couple enthusiastically agrees with her opinion. With nothing to fear for their evil deeds, the insane family sets sail for the mainland with the expectation of the next island community to torture for their enjoyment.